second to go ahead and say, no, this contract is not contingent on the appraisal. It's going to default, and you're going to have a contract where there is an appraisal contingency in effect just by default of not checking either box. Again, they have the option to either void or negotiate. And just like the inspection contingency, the appraisal offers the same window here to the seller to respond. So the buyer cannot void until 3 days after the last notice if there has been no resolution. The MAR contract is a little bit different. It automatically defaults an appraisal contingency when the financing addendum is used. So basically the language on the financing addendum states that the appraisal is automatically contingent, and that must be removed by a general addendum. We had spoken on our last meeting here kind of about the unauthorized practice of law and things that maybe you shouldn't be doing as a realtor as far as modifying a contract goes. I am of the opinion that you shouldn't be just crossing large sections of the contract. You have the general addendums to use. I think it's a good idea to use the general addendums to agree to things like removing the contingency. That way it's explicit. It's not just a cross out an initial on the contract. So for the MAR contracts, remove it by a general addendum. Just create a general addendum saying all parties agree that there is no appraisal contingency. All other conditions and terms remain the same. Again, on the MAR forms, the negotiation period is not fixed, and that's something that you're deciding there. I do want to make one point on the appraisal contingency. Appraisals are difficult, right? Because you might get one appraiser to go out. You don't get an appraisal that you love, and you're surprised by it. So you have the property reappraised, maybe a different appraiser, and it comes in better than what you thought, but maybe still missing the mark a little bit. So there's this kind of back and forth to getting a good appraisal done. And there's also a bit of a back and forth that can go on between the buyer and the seller as far as if they're going to meet in the middle somewhere, if they're going to reduce the sales price, if the buyer is just going to agree to move forward with the contract. It's all these options. So that takes time, right? Especially when you're going back, and if both parties are going back and forth and utilizing 3-day periods constantly, we're talking what could be a pretty good amount of time being used to sort out the appraisal, which may push up to your closing date, which may cause financing not to be ready at the time of the settlement that's been agreed to in the contract. So if that's the case, where the appraisal is causing a delay in the financing and the closing cannot happen on the settlement date due to the appraisal negotiation, then the buyer is not in default in this scenario for missing the closing date because financing was not ready. It's basically the lender is given good faith time to proceed and have the financing ready for settlement. If it takes a few days after settlement, it's something that's impliedly agreed to within the contract because of the delay of the appraisal contingency here. So just because things took longer to iron out than they should, we can't say that the buyer is just automatically in default because the lender didn't have enough time to be ready. I pulled up the GCAR contingency here language. So this is what I was saying earlier with regards to these boxes. So is or is not contingent blank days after ratification. So it says here, and it's often missed here, if neither box is checked, this contract is contingent upon the appraisal pursuant to this paragraph. So keep that in mind. If you intended not to have an appraisal contingency and you just left it blank, it's now contingent. So always go ahead and check where you should be on the contract. Make sure everything is filled out as it should be. Explicit is always better than leaving any room for interpretation when it comes to contracts. The MAR form is, I said automatically defaults. I thought I had it up here. I don't. So we'll get into the condo doc review here. So the condo docs are always a point of frustration, I feel like. So in the GCAR addendum here, we're talking about Form 921. The seller has 10 days to deliver the documents. The buyer then has 3 business days for review. So if the seller does not deliver within the 10 days, the buyer may void, but the contingency does not automatically continue. I think that is something that we see on our end quite often, where after the 10th day, the seller will actually furnish the condo docs, and then a buyer thinks that they have the right to go ahead and review those docs for 3 days because they had been furnished. That's not the case. So the buyer is impliedly agreeing to waive their right to the review period as soon as that 10th day is passed. So if they continue with the contract after the 10th day and they get the condo docs later on, they can't find something and say, I want to back out based on the condo doc review. They've agreed to it, even if they haven't expressly said on the 11th day that I'm willing to go through with this contract regardless of the docs. By not voiding and continuing on with the contract, they've gone ahead and waived the right. So that's something to be proactive on. If it's the 8th day, the 9th day, and the condo docs haven't been furnished there, you need them, or you need to do a general addendum to show that both sides are willing to push the review period or the delivery period further on. That way the buyer is still protected under the condo doc review here. And then there's always this notion of what's really required, right? All these different HOAs are furnishing resale packages and all different methods with all different third parties, and a lot of things sometimes are missed that should have been in there. And then it becomes a question of, well, was I given adequate documents within the 10-day period? So by law here in DC, you have the declaration, bylaws, plats and plans, and then the resale certificate here, which contains basically the finances of the association, reserves, insurance, basically the general information financially regarding the condo here. Maryland follows the Maryland Condominium Act and sets up basically all of the same regulations. So again, the declaration, bylaws, rules and regulations, insurances, any pending litigation, judgments, insurance policies, fees, assessments, everything. And then really the big one that's come up over the last 2 years or so is Virginia. And really because Virginia made it more difficult for anyone to understand what they're talking about, because they decided to call the resale package a resale certificate. So the resale package is one and the same now as the resale certificate. There is not a one-page certificate that Virginia is going to give. They're still giving the full resale package. That includes the declaration, bylaws, plats and plans, financials, everything. So long as you have received that, if you're looking for a specific certificate, it's probably not going to come. It's that resale package in total that is satisfying the condo docs that must be provided. All right, so next here, we'll get into the big one. This is basically the crux of it here. So the new financing addendum. So GCAR has gone ahead and updated the language on the conventional financing addendum here, and it's focusing on specified financing. So basically what we're looking at here is this portion of the GCAR financing addendum.
Luke,
So
can I interrupt you for a second? We have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Going back to the other slide, is it 10 days, calendar days, or 10 business days for the condo doc review?
So the condo doc review calls for 10 calendar days. And then the review period for the buyer calls for 3 business days. Thank you for that clarification. I have absolutely no idea how our GCAR form says that and why that hasn't been updated in the forms committee yet. It's a great one for the forms committee because they should be consistent here, I think, with what kind of days we're talking about. It's 10 calendar days to deliver the docs, 3 business days to review. All right, so touching on the financing contingency here. So the specified financing here has been updated to this absolutely lovely scenario now where we get to pick between section A and section B there. So most of the language here is the same so far as the first deed of trust section there. So the buyer will obtain the first deed of trust, loan amount, term, rate, etc. there. So the A and B selection is really what's new here. So if you select A, that means that your buyer has a pre-approval letter already from a lender and that your buyer is moving forward with that pre-approval letter, and that pre-approval letter has been furnished to the seller. A is tricky because A limits your buyer's option to seek financing different from their existing pre-approval without penalty. So you would say, okay, well, then maybe we'll default to B. And I think B may be the better answer here moving forward. The reason being because it includes the pre-approval letter that you already have. So a lender to whom the buyer made or will make written application within 7 days. So you're really covering the bases here by choosing B. So if your buyer has an existing pre-approval, it covers it in B. If they don't have a pre-approval, you're going to select B. And if they have a pre-approval, but they are still shopping around lenders, you're going to select B. So you can see there, if option B is selected, buyer has 7 days from the date of ratification to make written application for financing. Excuse me, let me pull this aside, with their lender of choice. If the buyer chooses to make written application with a lender other than the one that issued the pre-approval letter, buyer must deliver a pre-approval letter from the new lender to the seller within 7 days after ratification. Should buyer fail to make written application as required and or fail to provide a new pre-approval letter to the seller within 7 days after the date of ratification, the buyer will be deemed to waive the financing contingency, and alternate financing applies as identified in paragraph 4 below. Any change from the above constitutes alternate financing. So really, you're looking at B for the most part now moving forward. It's going to protect your buyer kind of more than A ever will, unless you're in a scenario where your buyer has a pre-approval letter and is basically 100% confident here that they're going to proceed with that lender. Otherwise, B gives them some ability to shop around. The biggest thing is that pre-approval letter absolutely has to be issued within that 7-day window, or else you're just waiving the contingency altogether, and you're going to be in an alternate financing scenario. So an alternate financing scenario is not a great place to be as a buyer, because alternate financing does not offer the lender any sort of leeway come the closing date to get everything together. So if you are a buyer and you fall into the alternate financing category and the lender is not going to be ready until the day after settlement, then unfortunately the seller can hold you in default. There's no kind of grace period to get things sorted out here. So that's the biggest change. So also with the alternate financing, I'm going to go back here. The big thing, any change from any of the above constitutes alternate financing. So we have the terms now listed in the first deed of trust section here. So we have a first deed of trust, loan amount, and it gives the loan to value there over X years at a rate not to exceed. So alternate financing is now going to encompass any change to those terms. So if you change the loan to value and your loan to value now exceeds what was written in the financing contingency, you are falling into alternate financing. If you switch from a 15 to a 30-year mortgage, you're falling into alternate financing. If your rate exceeds what was listed in the financing contingency, you're in alternate financing. So how are we combating this? I've spoken with a couple agents at this point, and we see some contracts and they'll say, I don't know, let's just put 10% in a rate not to exceed 10%, right? Then you go to make an offer and the listing agency is on the financing contingency that the buyer is looking to take out a conventional mortgage at a rate not to exceed 10%. And they scratch their head and they say, well, is this really the best offer when I have another offer on the table that is looking at 6.5 or 7%? So I think we're going to see a world here where it becomes a little more commonplace to maybe see somewhat of a higher number in there, because you're doing what you need to do to ensure that the buyer isn't slipping into alternate financing just as a result of interest rate changes or when they locked or things like that. For the time being, if you want to protect yourself and maybe go, or protect your buyer, I should say, and maybe go like a point higher or so and explain that to the listing agent when you make your offer, I think that's a good idea. It's better safe than sorry for your buyer. And I think one thing that we've seen one of so far this year, but it's going to become maybe a little more commonplace, is that when completing this section of the contract, the buyer will say, well, I have a rate of 6.5%. So they have a rate of 6.5%, but they also have points. So they're utilizing buy down points here for the rate. And then they put in 6.5% into the contract here. And then come time to negotiate everything and get the CD worked out and to get everything balanced, the buyer decides, I'm not using the points anymore. I don't want to pay for the points because it's causing me to have to bring a little more money to closing or whatever it may be. I don't want to use the points any longer. Well, if you put 6.5 in here, because that's what it was with the points, and then they remove the points from the equation, and that rate jumps up to 7 or 7.25 or whatever it may be, unfortunately, they're in an alternate financing situation now where they have to settle on the settlement date. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, unless the seller is willing to extend. So remember that when you're filling out a contract, what's your rate? And then do you have points? And if you have points, what are you buying? So we can put in a number here that is far and away going to cover your buyer.
Luke, we have
The other
another
thing here.
question. Real quick question. What if you switch from conventional to FHA?
Yes. So again, that's going to also matter here. So if you change basically any of the terms of the contract here, so you're changing from conventional to FHA to VA, jumbo to whatever it may be, you are going to fall into alternate financing. So any material change whatsoever from the financing contingency there is going to fall into alternate financing. So it's a very, very strict set of rules here that's been updated for the GCAR addendum. I would say, unfortunately, your best bet is to have a pre-approval letter in the beginning from at least one lender, and that way they have some sort of kind of estimate of cost, everything like that, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're even thinking about changing loan types after the contract has already been ratified. You really want to be in a place where you understand what you're going with. And then really the goal after that would be to try and shop lenders for better rates possibly that fall within the contingency, but we shouldn't be changing really material things. And I think that's a step that buyers are going to have to understand needs to be taken care of before an offer is put on the property. Right here, does anyone have any questions on financing, alternate financing there? And the other sections, I will say, still remain the same, so long as the financing contingency remains in effect. The seller still does have that right to void until the pre-approval letter has been issued, and all of the miscellaneous provisions that were still in the financing contingency remain. The substantial change has just been to the specified financing portion and then that A and B selection item. All right, if no other questions on the financing, then that leaves us with Close It. A big announcement on Close It. I know a lot of people use Close It, and a lot of people are tired of being charged $4.99 a month to use Close It. Close It, as of today, is now a free to use platform. So if you want to build your net sheets or build your buyer estimates here, you still will need to log in, although you'll no longer be getting charged. So it's just going to log in. That way you can keep track of the net sheets and everything that you've done. But it's going to be a free to use website version and app version effective today, April 1st. So that'll be free moving forward.
And one more feature of that is that your signed settlement statements will be saved in your Close It app account, so that if you need to go back and resend, or at tax time, maybe you send it out to your clients, you can go back in and just download that from the transaction. So you've got those saved for you in your account.
Yep. All right, so that's everything for this meeting. I know that's a ton of stuff to throw at you quickly and not in as much detail as it could be, because when we're talking about multiple contingencies, we could take hours sitting here and I don't want to use all of your time. If you do have questions on contingencies of any kind, including the new financing contingency, please contact our attorneys. The best way is just through our attorney's email, which is attorneys@federaltitle.com. And we'll get back to you on it, especially if you are weighing options with a buyer as far as financing goes. and you have questions on what's the right way to complete the contingency there, just reach out to us prior to settlement. I mean, not prior to settlement, prior to ratification, and we'll get back to you quickly as to kind of how to proceed and what is best protecting your client there. And then next month, we're going to talk about assessments. So assessments are mundane, but at the same time, there are a lot of programs out there that I don't think are well known. We obviously all know about the homestead. I don't think we know so much about the senior citizen, the disabled credit that goes on to tax accounts on through OTR in DC. And then we're going to talk about assessment calculations, the time periods in both Maryland and DC for applying for homesteads, what that does to the taxes. And then we'll talk about some of the programs as well, like tax abatement, for example, that's going to remove your tax liability for your buyer for 5 years if they do qualify. So we'll get kind of a deep dive into assessments. We're also going to answer some of the questions we see often, like if you have a new construction purchase where the assessed value is much lower than the new sales price, what to expect as far as a new assessment for the coming tax year, when that'll get done, how much that's going to change things, how that's going to change possibly your monthly payment, especially if you're a buyer that's taking out financing on new construction or recently extensively renovated property, because your escrow, your monthly payment is probably going to be a little higher than you may think because the current tax bill is not going to hold once you move into your ownership in the next coming years when things get reassessed. And then we'll take a look at the assessment criteria and then the appeals criteria as well in both Maryland and DC. That way you are furnished with the information as to what to do when your buyer calls you a year later and says, our property just got reassessed 25% year over year. What do we do? How do we move forward? So that's what we'll be talking about next month. And that'll be May 6th, 11:30 a.m. Again, first Tuesday of every month, we'll dive into some topics. That being said, if there are topics that you guys want us to talk about, feel free to shoot us an email and we'll get something on the books here. That way we're speaking about information you want to know about instead of just the standard lunch and learn Tuesday TOPA talks. So otherwise, everyone have a great afternoon. Thanks so much. If you do have any questions on anything, please reach out to us. Again, attorneys@federaltitle.com is a good email for all of us. And then I'm sure all of you have our specific contact info as well. So have a great rest of your week.